Sorry, I'm just getting carried away reading the chat there. That was very exciting. Maybe we could spend all our time in there. Good evening. You're very welcome to this special, holiday special, because it's half term, let's call it that. Holiday special Molten live stream thingy where I decided, inspired, I think it was, by the recent Aitken and Waterman documentary on Channel 5, to talk about 1980s pop music. And to do that, I've invited a couple of lovely people to join me for a bit of a chinwag about it. However, before we start, there was something I felt I needed to either get across or say or confess to or something along the lines of... I haven't started drinking yet. Along the lines of that... what am I trying to say? I don't know how... you may be new to this channel, which is fine. I usually talk about synthesizers and I write about synthesizers and stuff. And what I am, essentially, when you boil down to it, I'm a professional hobbyist. And so it's a very easy position for me, someone like myself, to be an armchair critic, to just sit back and criticize and say, oh, it's rubbish. And I hate all of that. But however, I have learned over the years, because I review things, that art in all of its forms matters to people. It matters to the people who make it. It matters to the people who consume it. And so to dismiss stuff out of hand, to just rubbish stuff because you don't fancy it, is not really doing it justice. So what I don't want to do this evening, or what I don't want you to think is this evening is about, is to just tell you how terrible things are and how awful I think this, that, and the other is.
Things are terrible.
Yeah, but... because the reason for that is because behind the scenes there are people who are working their socks off trying to make this stuff come alive. And it might be the tape op, it might be the person who had to load Pete Waterman's coffee with cocaine, who knows. It could have, those jobs exist, and many of us do those jobs because that's what we want to, that's the industry we want to work in, and that's the music industry. And it is a very broad church, and it contains many, many things, some of which are great, some of which are bad. But within all of that, I just want it to be an upbeat discussion and a good-hearted thing, because we love the people who make this stuff, regardless of how we may feel about it from a point of view of taste. So that being said, I would just like to say that I also need to remain sort of true to my feelings at the time. And so I'm not going to sort of pussyfoot around or walk on eggshells around anything, because this is real music and real stuff that happened in a real time of my life that I feel very passionate about. So I have those two things in balance, is all I'm saying. So I don't want people to get the wrong idea or think we're being unnecessarily cruel to lovely people who have done lovely work. Does that make sense? I don't know.
Yeah. Does.
Well, I'll let you think about that or chew on that while I introduce you to our guests. And just talk amongst yourselves while I find the right button. It was that one. That's the one. So I would like to introduce you to to Robbie Puricelli from the Pro Synth Network at the top, and also from other places, and Paulee Alex Bow from space, I think.
From space. Clearly from space.
Oh, yes, there you go.
And so these two lovely people have graciously agreed to be on this live stream with me to talk about the 1980s, to talk about pop music, to talk about music production techniques, where that took us. Did it take us anywhere? Has it had the lasting legacy? Because what echoes about in my brain is, after watching Pete Waterman talk, which for me is never a pleasant experience, his unshakable confidence in the legacy that the Hit Factory and Aitken and Waterman brought to pop music is extraordinary. And regardless of what I think about that music or that era, there's something in his confidence which you can't kind of ignore. He's absolutely convinced that it was groundbreaking and ground shaking. And I don't know, let's start with that. What does anybody think about that? Robbie, what do you think?
He is incredibly confident that what he and Matt and Mike did was groundbreaking and revolutionary, but it wasn't, because it's been done many times before and many times since. What he did was, though, he had an ear for what the kids wanted, and I use that phrase, it's a quite broad, phrase. But he knew what was going down in the clubs, because that's where he came from. He was a DJ in the clubs, and he knew what got people on the floor, what got people excited, and ultimately what sold records. And he had that unique perspective, and was able to then bring that experience into a studio and tell people that's what you need to do. Not a musical bone in his body. He's an impresario. He was but he instinctively knew what was good and what wasn't, what would sell records and what would work. And the track record does speak for itself. That cannot be denied, whether you love or hate them. They had, what was it, about a 30% market share. 30% of hit records in the UK at that time came from the stock Aitken and Waterman factory. So, you can't deny it. But of course, commercial success does not equate critical acclaim. But there you go.
Sure.
Paulie, I mean, what's interesting to add to this is that myself and Robbie, we're of a similar age, and we lived it, man. We lived through that thing.
You weren't there, man.
Yeah. Paulie, you're a little bit younger, but
just a little
the
bit.
reason that you interest me in this subject is because you have such an affinity for the technology, and you're really interested in the timescale and the music and all that sort of thing. And so, from a bit more of that outsider perspective, what do you make of it? I'll go open my beer.
Yeah, that's great. Specifically, and this is where I should come clean.
He's not really 23 years old.
That's it, basically. I'm not 23 years old. I'm 40 years old. So
look 23.
Oh, okay. That's very nice of you. So the thing about music is, and I always go on about autism all the time. Anyone who knows me, I talk about autism all the time. So sorry for mentioning the autism card. I'm a card carrier. Music to me, I'm not so keen so much in the musicological element of it. Like musical movements like punk and blah, blah, blah and stuff like that, and what was cool and what wasn't cool. I am a total harmony geek, even above synths. And, I absolutely fell in love with synths. I've got a room full of them. I'm a total harmony geek. So that perspective comes from, basically. So in terms of stock Aitken Waterman, specifically, they had some pretty good, well-written records, and some quite harmonically ingenious one. I just got the chords to "I Should Be So Lucky" up earlier.
It's a good example.
It starts in A, then there's a pre-chorus that goes up to B, and then the chorus is in C major. I'm like, and it all flows through those chromatic changes, and it's actually, the bubblegum pop production style can be kind of off-putting if you listen to it. But if you actually, if you actually took those chords and just slowed it down a bit and kind of did something with it, you might actually end up with something that's pretty cool. Yeah. So my perspective is that interesting harmony is kind of dying out in pop music. That's where I feel we're at now. Although I am hearing a few bits and pieces, like songs used for TV series and films and stuff like that. I think that's where you get a bit more kind of slightly underground, but still quite mainstream, interesting stuff. I think the kids are actually starting to do something quite interesting. But I think the top 40 is, for me, and again, I'm not being nasty, because we're not being nasty, are we, Robin? But the modern top 40 has very little for me. It's got very little for me in terms of chords that make my ears prick up and go, wow. Because harmony to me is so important and integral to the music I make, and it's how I listen to music in these kind of layers of harmony. And if it's not there, I'm like, oh, that's, it's like a shell of a song to me. If there's not something in it, could be a clashy atonal thing, it'll still make me go, oh, that was a bold move, putting that note there. Did they know what they were doing, or did they just like look out with that note there? But it's interesting, it's kind of so I'm gonna enjoy kind of discussing how the 80s, which was still a very harmonically rich time, so many amazing pop songs in the 80s that used great harmony, so many sampled records as well, sampling and stuff like that had amazing harmony because they'd chosen to sample a song that had amazing harmony in the first place, and where that's gone, and did that decline start in the 80s? That would be quite interesting for me to explore. I don't know if anything of what I said is relevant there, but that's that's my perspective on music.
Hey, we all have our perspectives, as you say. I mean, do you think that these days that there's something in virtuoso vocals? Is it all focused very much on the lead so that you don't get those that bigger sound of harmony around things, or is that
sure?
Yeah,
there was a conversation in the forums, and he said that young people who love popular music today have a different connection to the artist thanks to Spotify, the internet, etc. Narrowed tastes and production objectives are also a part of it. So bass, harmony, and lots of other things were expendable. And this is completely unlike anything we've seen in the past. And anybody who spends time around these people as they experience the music and talks with them about it will see that it's different. Their access to it is different. They're caught up in the Rihanna, Chris Brown drama. They like what The Weeknd conveys to them about club culture, obsessive attraction, etc. It's different. It's drama. It feels personal to them, and they're oddly emotional about it. So it seems, that.
But that's the claim, because I mean, as me and
sure.
Robbie will know, as Gen Xers, I suppose we're the forgotten generation, and of course all these things existed. In the 80s, we were so invested in the music because, I mean, I've been thinking about
personality.
I've been thinking about this a lot, I suppose, in the lead up to this, in that the 80s was a decade. I mean, it kicked off with things like the Nolan sisters, for heaven's sake. And at the other end, you've got the Stone Roses. You've got a huge movement, and all of that went through the end of disco, the end of punk. We still had the Police going and the Jam going. Then we had the whole new romantic thing go off, and at the same time, and the same time as that, you had soul and R&B in a rhythm and blues way, not in a whatever it is these days. As another thing, you had De La Soul or Loose Ends or that kind of stuff going on somewhere else, and then you had more art rock with Art of Noise or Trevor Horn or stuff, but then you had metal, you had Saxon, for heaven's sake, going on, and then you had the Cure and Depeche Mode and the Sisters of Mercy. All of these things, you could sit down and watch the chart show on a Saturday morning. You would have different chart after different chart. You get a bit of Bon Jovi, and then you get a bit of this, that. It was so broad, and it's 10 years worth of music, which is a huge amount of change that went on at that time. So to try to pin it down into this is what 80s music was is almost impossible, I would say.
I was thinking about this earlier, and I think the first half of the 1980s, I just remember, like, every week in smash hits or on the charts or on top of the pops, there was a new act, there was a new band that were different else that had gone before, and they were just some of them would last a couple of hit records. Some of them would go on to still be around to this day and on these legacy tours. But it was forever changing. It was almost like, you know, punk. I always think of punk having lived through that. It was an enema. It just flushed. It flushed the system and gave a new platform based on a democratization of making music. Up until then, you know, you kind of had to be, you know, trained or very lucky or very wealthy to kind of break into it. And punk said, no, you don't need anything. You just need a guitar or a bass and some drums, or, you know, it doesn't matter how good or bad they are. Make a noise, make a statement, get your friends involved. And it was all very DIY. Punk came, went very quickly, and in its place was a bunch of young people who still had that ethic of do it yourself.
Yeah.
But of course, the technology was now ramping up, and we were getting synthesizers, and we were getting other new tools to make our music. And, you know, so many of them moved to that electronic side, and that's when things started to really take off. But, you know, it still bugs me that, like, This Charming Man was 1983. I always think of it as later on. You know, jingly jangly indie pop, I always think it was a little bit later on, but it was 1983.
Yeah.
At the same time as we were having, you know, all of that massive kind of the end of the New Romantics and the birth of that big, you know, pop production stuff that was coming on. And I think that, you know, pop music exponentially just got so much better until 1984. For me, that's the peak. That was like the best year in the 1980s for pop music, because it was diverse, it was interesting, it was exciting. The technology was just like, you know, just every week there'd be new synthesizers, new sounds, new people doing things crazy with them. 1985 was a bit of a plateau. It just kind of like, you know, extended 84 a little bit, and then we started to see, I think, labels, management thinking, there's a formula here, and we now have a mass audience through videos, not just radio. CDs coming in, cassettes. As you know, the cassette sales were booming. You know, I was a huge cassette purchaser. I didn't buy a lot of vinyl at all, you know, towards the end of the 80s, because I wanted, you know, in my Walkman and in the car, so it was always cassettes. And there was this kind of homogenization, I think, happened, and we started to get lots more this kind of manufactured formulaic pop,
right?
And everything else kind of then split off and went a little bit underground. And then, of course, from that underground scene, we got more electronic music when the disenfranchised kids who didn't like the stock Aitken and Waterman stuff were going around car boot sales, finding 808s and 303s for 50 quid or less, and thinking, what's this stuff that people have chucked away because everyone wanted a DX7 or a D50? And they started making their own DIY music with all of this stuff. Then we got into the whole, you know, rave scene and the acid house scene, and that's when it started getting exciting again. And then we were into the 90s. But yeah, it was for me 1984, and I brought some books to. If you haven't read this one, this is 1984, British Pop's Dividing Year. It's absolutely fascinating, and it really does tell the story of that year that I think it really did. You know, as an art form, pop music in '84 was just the best.
Well, interesting. I can add to that a little bit, because I brought a couple of records along, right? Actually, I might make myself big for this, just so people can see. So, I mean, this is. Let's put it in front of my microphone. This is the original Now album. Unfortunately, not the original. This is the reissue. But funny enough, I do have the original, just it's on cassette. And I only have half of the cassette. The other half fell out somewhere and has disappeared. But anyway, so this is about 83, I think this was.
It was, yeah.
And the range of stuff,
but yeah,
the diversity is just quite
Tracy
extraordinary. You know, there's every type of music is represented in here. Culture Club, God bless them. Lamal, love that guy. Love Nick Beggs as well. So I mean, you saw some of those. I'm not going to have to go read them all out. But then I've also got a hits album, 8. This is 89.
That was the ITV of the compilation album.
Yeah, it's a flipping disaster. Now, I mean, I could say that this last disc here, you've got Sisters of Mercy. Look at that, Jesus and Mary Chain.
They always put those acts on side 4,
Yeah,
didn't they?
They did.
Always.
You got your little alternative half hour just there, but
So
otherwise,
let's tick the goth box. Here we go.
Otherwise, let's get it on. There we go. Yeah. So you've got. Let's put it in. There we go. You've got a terrible remix of Michael Jackson. You've got Tiffany, Taylor Devine. Who on earth is that? Desireless, who was actually produced by Pet Shop Boys. Yeah, I did.
She did that tour of shopping centres, didn't she?
Oh yeah. Well, that says it all, doesn't it? Pop stars playing in, the centre of capitalism, of Western capitalism. It's a living shopping mall.
I mean, having listened to this recently, I don't recognise an awful lot of it. I mean, I recognise lots of the names, but lots of the tracks, I don't know, they all just sort of gel into each other. I mean,
they were very forgettable.
Yeah, they were very forgettable, and that's part of what happened, I think, in my experience of the music at the time, because I was very big into dancing. I had an older brother, so I was always going to things that were slightly just out of my league, if you know what I mean. So I was dancing with older girls at the age of like 13, 14. So I loved discos. I would dance everything. And the thing is that you would dance to the pop, and then you would have the alternative half hour where you'd put your head down slightly and mooch about to some Smiths and Cure, which was great. And then you'd have the slow dances, which were great.
The erection section.
And then they'd put some funk on, which was great. Yep. You dance to all of it. But then... I'm getting older, so there's a slight, I'm starting at 16, 17 in 86, 87. It is starting to change, and it's getting a bit boring, and you're sort of dancing to the same thing. There's no big, it's this song, let's go and dance to it. They have just put Bad Manners on, here we go. Something was lost in the sameness, in the repetitiveness, that I blame the Hit Factory for.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I began DJing around 1986. My first DJ gig was probably about 84 when I did a high school thing. But my first kind of paid gig was 1986. Yeah. And around then it was still, people were still wanting to hear songs from a year or two ago. So it was still kind of vibrant and diverse. But I carried on doing that until about 88, 89, when I stopped playing other people's music and started playing, my own in bands and stuff. And if you go and record collection downstairs, you will find a ton of stock Aitken and Waterman and similar stuff that I bought purely because that's what people were wanting to hear. And I distinctly remember, listening to this stuff and thinking, hang on a minute, has that gone on too long, or have I started another record and that sounds very much the same as the last one? Because it all did start. There was many songs. I mean, again, I went through. I unashamedly have a collection of stock Aitken and Waterman singles that they released or reissued, and there's a version of a Rick Astley track. I forget which one it is now, but it was done by another artist because they wrote it for another artist. And then it didn't really hit for them, so they took it and they sped it up a bit, changed the arrangement ever so slightly, got Rick to sing on it, and it's a global smash, and it's a really good pop song. And it's funny you should mention Kylie Minogue, because another one that jumped out at me recently that I'd forgotten how good it was, a musical composition and arrangement, was Je ne sais pas pourquoi. Now, you listen to the chord progressions in that, it's insane. How is that a 3.5 minute pop song? Sure. It's so good. And then you listen to the arrangements and the instrumentation, and Mike and Matt, who were the guys in the studio writing and doing all of this, were absolute masters, not only of songwriting, but of arrangements and the use of the latest technology, the layers, all that kind of syncopation and splitting of chords into individual notes that were then played by different instruments with different voices. It's so clever, a lot of it. But on the flip side, there's some dross in there. There really is. There's some stuff that they just churned out. They just phoned
some
it
Bros
in.
dross.
Oh, well, yeah. But I mean,
I don't know about Bros. On that Hits album, it's a standout track, I have to say. I Owe You Nothing.
They had some good songs. They did have some good
before
songs.
the bass player left, obviously, I was in with them when Craig was still there. What is he doing? It's like Jason Donovan playing guitar on one of his tracks.
Yeah.
Too many broken hearts in the world.
Yeah.
Is he? What's that? What are you playing, mate? But
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it was
Those chords.
yeah. I mean, I just remember it got very homogenous, very much the same, and formulas were found that wrote checks, and it was like,
Yes.
and for those that haven't watched this documentary, which was on Channel 5 here in the UK, it was a two-parter, so it's a 2-hour long thing. It was very obvious that they found a niche, they found a formula, and then everybody came to them and said, "We want you to do that with our new act." Now, took Sunita there and said, "Do what you do, but give us a song with Sunita." And that's all it was. And the ironic thing is, we talked about indie acts, with jingly jangly guitars, or the goths, or all that kind of stuff. Technically, Stock Aitken Waterman, all of that was independent. They were not a major label. They weren't signed to any major. They were all indies.
Sure.
And it was kind of testament to that aspect of music making. They just did it and did it big and made a ton of money from it.
But when we talk about the method of production, I mean, do you think they invented anything, a new way of doing things, or do you think the technology invented that method?
Probably more the other. I think the technology enabled them to do stuff. But if you listen to their arrangements and their songwriting, it's nothing new. It was being done, with Motown in the 60s. They had formulas. They knew certain instrumentations. Everybody knows the Motown drum beat. That kind of, 4 on the snare. That's a very Motown thing, and it works. And you listen to how many songs have that pattern on it. It just works, and that's what the kids were into. And these guys, they found what the kids were into, and it was more about drum machines fall to the floor, funky bass lines, great harmonies, great melodies. I mean, that's one of the big differences between then and now is melody. There's no melody anymore, I don't think. No, I'm not hearing anything.
Oh, that sounded like a real old fart.
Yeah, get off my lawn.
Old man yells at cloud.
Let me take that back. There is lots of melody around, but when it comes to popular chart music of the day, which I'm obviously no longer the target market, I'm not hearing the melodies. I'm not hearing great chord progressions. You listen to things like Pet Shop Boys, who had chord progressions coming out of every orifice that was just so spectacular and cinematic and widescreen and emotion, full of emotion. And now it's just, it's like the Millennium Chant. Remember that a few years ago? Ew, ew. It was like on every song because it's what kids, latched onto.
Those bloody
don't
kids.
Get me started on the speeding up of what is this current trend with speeding up songs for TikTok? Ugh.
I guess you got to fit it into a smaller space.
Exactly, yeah.
But don't we all watch? We watch all movies at twice speed these days, don't we? You can get through a whole box set in an afternoon rather than having to trawl through it all. But Paulie, what do you think about the technological impact? What was it that? What technology really did it? Who do we blame?
Who do we blame for the downfall of Western civilization? So I think there's a couple of strands to this. One, of course, is sampling. Sampling is a tool at the end of the day, just like the tape recorder was before it. But it allowed whole groups of people to start to assemble music. I was one of them, with my Amiga in a bit later, 1995. Which was the best game in town for about 100 quid in 95 to give to a kid, because it's got four channels of sampling and about 1 megabyte of RAM. It's only like 28 kilohertz, so it's not CD quality, but you give that to a kid and you just tell them, just sample him whatever you want, and just sequence it and stick it together. And that definitely had a massive impact on music. It's postmodernism, isn't it? It's the start of recycling bits of other records to create something new. I think the other major thing, though, and the thread that I think runs through to this day, is that you don't need many musicians around to make a record anymore. So, for instance, if in the 60s, 70s, you might have someone who wrote an entire score and gave it to the musicians and they plunked along like robots, right? Maybe like for a James Bond film or something. Here's your score, play it. But more often than not, you had a lot of jamming, and you'd have maybe a guitarist go, "Oh, I've got this bit," or the keyboard player, "I've got this bit," and that sort of jamming approach was kind of lost a bit in the 80s. There were still bands, but a single person could now create an entire arrangement, and it's that way today as well. And I guess it means that you're more reliant on that single person to be a bloody genius
True.
rather than being a few people around going, actually that bass line's a bit crap, why don't you try this, why don't you try that? So it's the start of, I mean, there was multi-tracking, of course, in the sort of 60s and 70s for hobbyists, but it was the real start of one person assembling music, being able to assemble music. And that's what we've got to this day. And some one-man bands, for want of a better term, are going to be great because that one person knows how to write a good drum track, knows how to write a good bass line, knows how to write a good guitar part, or whatever they're doing. But some people might not. And that, combined with the, again, I'm not putting a value judgment on it just because I love harmony, but that might not be the focus now for music. Music might just be a vessel to... Music might just be more about the beat and the lyrics to carry a message, potentially, rather than something we listen to feel kind of inspired in a harmonically rich way. People might listen to it for different purposes, and that's okay. You know, it's a hard life.
And it's the demise of the album as well, isn't it? I mean, we were very album orientated back in the 80s. It was all about, the albums. Even into the 90s, albums were still a really important thing. And then with the dawn of streaming and digital downloads, where if you liked a band, but you really only liked that one song, you could then get that one song. And you then lose the joy of an album. And it just becomes, it's a short, sharp hit. It's a little, little boom, and there you go.
I mean, you used to have 2 singles and an album and a little tour every year. Yeah. You'd expect the next album, and there'd be a couple of singles. You'd enjoy the B-sides because no one ever heard those before.
Original B-sides,
Yeah, and then the album would come out, and that was it. That's what you expected. Didn't expect 8 singles off an album. Didn't expect an album of 15, 20 songs. Like you get on, like you got on them CDs.
Biggest selling album of all time was 1982 Thriller, and of was it 9 tracks on there, at least 6 were singles, weren't there? It was, but that was unique. That even back then we were going, wow, you buy that album, you've literally got a dozen hit or half a dozen hit singles on there. It wasn't the norm. So
it also felt a long time between like Billie Jean and Thriller single wise. That felt like a long period of time. And how he evolved on video, because you saw it on you saw it MTV and stuff. You started to see it on the telly, and you saw this progression of bands as well over time.
But as you say, I think B-sides is a very important aspect. That the original B-side always, it was like, I was a big Adam Ant fan in the very early 80s, and once Adam got really famous, so from like Dog Eat Dog, Kings of the Wild Frontier onwards, he would always stick an old track as the B-side. So you got this value, and sometimes it was a re-recorded version, or sometimes it was a live version. But you got you bought Stand and Deliver, and you got Beat My Guest, which is all about bondage and stuff on the B-side. And an 11-year-old me is going
to that.
Well, 11-year-old me is going, what on earth is this? Friend or Foe, the B-side. was it Friend or Foe? There was one of those singles from Friend or Foe where you had "Why Do Girls Like Horses?" I mean, come on. It was, yeah, these were great old songs from back in the day, you know.
Can I mention one astounding B-side from the 80s? Do you know the band, I think it was called Real Life, and they had a song called Send Me an Angel. Send me an angel right now. Anyhow, that was their A-side. They did a song called Like a Gun, and it's the best B-side of the 80s. You just put that on, and it's incredible. It's like, when the love is gone, turn and run like a gun, like a gun. It's amazing. Everyone go away and listen to Like a Gun later. It's incredible.
But you bought a single, you got 2 songs. Nowadays, you buy a single, it actually is a single. It's just one track, and you feel a little bit shortchanged. And there's not many bands that still put out original. I mean, I still think some of the Pet Shop Boys' best albums were their collections of B-sides. You know, Alternative is a fantastic album because it's all of those amazing B-sides that are just as good as the A's, you know.
Just to settle an argument in the chat, I would say that MTV drove the arrival of video onto our screens in Top of the Pops and chart shows and other places. It really pushed video out there as an art form, which revolutionized music in a different ways. There was a documentary by John Peel and his producer guy who, it doesn't matter, which like went on all night. It was like a video jukebox that went deep into the origins of MTV and video making at the time, and it was just that sort of changed my life. And it pulled in things like Grace Jones and the crossover between marketing and advertising and music. It was the first time we'd seen Thriller in its full length.
Mesmerized me as a child.
Oh,
Grace
totally.
Jones, I was I was 3 or 4. I saw Grace Jones. I was like, wow, who is that?
Actually, I have a tiniest anecdote of Grace Jones' disappointment, which is that I met I met her producer and made a computer for them I used to build computers for studios, and I put a computer in their studio, and he was just a very unlikable person.
No.
And I know,
producer was this?
I'm not saying.
She's had a few.
Name and shame.
And he's just very dismissive of me, but and it's like he played guitar on Island Life, and it's like, no, that can't be right, because that's that feeds my soul, that record, and it doesn't seem to match up to the person I have in front of me. But then that's life, isn't it?
Yeah.
I only ever trust great musicians to be great musicians.
That's a very, very
words to live and die by. Yeah.
Talking of a formula, I find it easy within the space of like I've got my polyboot here, like set up. I find it very interesting how in the space of 6 years, Genesis went from this to
Yeah, because 5/4 time doesn't get to number 1, does it?
No. Well, I think it might have done quite well at the time, but
it did. I mean, those, So let's not go into the whole.
You can't really dance to turn it on again. Well, I can, because I know when the beats come in.
Yeah.
I just do that with my head.
Everyone's looking at you saying,
But it's interesting, isn't it?
Somebody mentioned, I think it might have been Technomatic, who is of course the wonderful Simon Forsyth in the chat, said MIDI, and I think that's hugely important as well. You mentioned sampling. I think MIDI and the way it enabled, again, this kind of bedroom production thing that we didn't have. When I were a lad in the 1980s, I used to read through my magazines and see, I lapsed into my Norwich there, and I used to read magazines and see people. I'd see Howard Jones, for crying out loud. In 1983, Howard Jones was on stage with what was it? A Moog Prodigy, a Jupiter 8, a Juno 6 or 60, CP70, a couple of 808, a couple of Simmons units, and he was doing it all himself. He didn't need anybody else, and it was just like, oh my god, this is it. It can be done now. That made me want to be a pop star more than anything else. The fact that I could be completely in control and do everything myself and not have to try and find. It wasn't because I was a control freak. I just didn't think living in rural East Anglia.
Absolutely.
There was nobody else really that was into the stuff I was into. It was either you're either a mod or you're into like Iron Maiden. So it's guitars and bass and drums. And for me, it was like, give me a synthesizer any day of the week. And so the fact that MIDI gave us an opportunity to then, look at Howard Jones. He wasn't always using MIDI. He was, using, absolute talent. But there was a way for us to say, right, I can buy a synthesizer and a drum machine and a sequencer.
Yeah.
And
I can be Thomas Dolby.
And you could be, you could. And it was just, wow, that's the thing that made me, really want to do it, and I mean, look at the Fairlight. Obviously, none of us could afford it at the time, and lots of us can't afford it now. But that again, you saw that on TV, you saw that in videos, and you read about it in magazines, and they told you that this was all you needed.
Yeah,
this one machine, you could produce an entire professional sounding piece of music. And as soon as that hit, it changed the world. It's for me, it's ground zero for Doors. That was the point where it all started. And you think the Fairlight, it launched late 79, so it just about got in by 86. Robin, you'll be able to tell me that when we were seeing Cubase or predecessors of Cubase around between 84 and 86. Started on the Commodore, wasn't there? Was Pro 12 or something, and then
there was
the Amigas and the STs.
Yeah,
wasn't long before we could now buy one of those computers as the great there you go, and link it up to an affordable sampler. That's it. There's your Fairlight. There's your sequencer. There's your sampler. Away you go. It was so easy.
Yeah.
And
I'll just say I'll play you a track at the end of this, which is a track of mine from 1985, which has sampling on it, which is a good example of bedroom music making.
I loved it.
But thank you. But I just a couple of Fairlight observations. There's for some reason I can't get this in my head. It was Niles Rodgers, wasn't it, who works on Duran Duran? Is that?
He did. Yeah, he did Seven and the Ragged Tiger, or around that era.
Yeah. So please tell me now, wasn't it that one? Anyway, there was a track from Duran Duran, which I'm embarrassed I can no longer remember, which they recorded as a band, and then it went to Niles, I think, who Fairlighted the.
Oh, Reflex.
Reflex. That's the fella. Thank you.
Yeah. The original.
Fairlighted the heck out of it, and. I remember seeing the band saying, and the first time we heard it, we were completely blown away. And it was an example of how you can take a band and just completely modernize their sound. Not that there's anything wrong with them beforehand. It just brought this entire new edge and flavor, because the Fairlight had a flavor to it that really, just made the track stand out. But then also at sort of the same time, I remember there's this documentary where I saw, I think it was Then Jericho. They were in the studio. They were irrelevant because the documentary was talking about the Fairlight, and they had the bass player there, and he played one note. The producer got him to play one note. They sampled it into the Fairlight, and then he was told to piss off back home. And
it was actually Synclavier, but it was the same thing.
Oh, was it? It was a Synclavier.
Yeah, it was Martin Russian.
I'm really
Martin
messing
Russian.
myself up. But it seems so anti-band. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there seems like there's these two things going on. On one hand, it could completely revolutionize a track, and on the other hand, there seems to be to the detriment of the musicians getting together and playing, and the value of that. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, Def Leppard did much the same. When Mutt Lange got hold of them, and he had a Fairlight. All the drums on Pyromania and Hysteria, they're all Fairlight.
Yeah.
And when I first heard that, I thought, oh yeah, that's because Rick lost his arm. But no, he hadn't lost his arm when they were doing Pyromania, but they were still doing it all through the Fairlight. And Fairlight.
That 80s snare, man, that's everywhere on that album. It's just everywhere.
Fairlight actually was used on so many records.
Yeah.
and lots of them didn't want to admit it because it was seen as cheating. It was seen as,
I think there's a 80s record of a footballer. It might be like George Best or something, doing a duet with a woman, and every note has been sampled into a Fairlight and then pitch corrected. It was came up on Bargain Hunt, and it sold for like 50 quid. So that's how I know.
Yeah. But yeah, people were using
seek it out.
ZZ Top, big users of the Fairlight from was it what's the one with is it Exterminate? No, Exterminate, one of those. The Smiths used Fairlights on Strange Ways Here We Come. It was all over the place, and it did color the 80s, not only in terms of the sound that it was producing, because obviously it was a lo-fi sampler. It colored the sound, but it also colored the feel, because Page R was very robotic, and everything was in 4/4. It's very it was, you could do weird time signatures, but it just made for that easy thing to do, and I think easy then became popular and then became everything. It was everywhere.
Somebody mentioned Frankie Goes to Hollywood in the chat, and I remember seeing Frankie on the Tube, the show The Tube, pre Trevor Horn. So they were, I think in fact they weren't even signed, and they played. That's think it was Relax.
It's what got them signed. Yeah,
they played Relax, and it's in a blooming major key. I'm like,
it's bizarre.
Jolly.
And then so like Trevor phoned them up and says, "Oh yeah, you should pop round," and so they did, and he redid the lot, and it turned it into this extraordinary album of sound that I don't think we've ever heard since.
No, I mean that was a huge. I've researched the production of that album a lot, and it wasn't just the amount of instruments that we used; it was the amount of players that we used, and the amount of versions and takes. I mean, everyone goes on about the bass line from Two Tribes, which is this amazing, that bass line is made up of, I think it's something in the region of 5 or 6 different instruments. And the beauty of the production is that Trevor just gives one or other of those instruments, pushes into the front. So when in the quiet bits, it's the acoustic bass, the electric bass that Mark O'Toole was playing, and then when you get into the chorus, up goes the PPG track, which is exactly the same, but it's just dominant because it's got that real cutting punch to it.
Sure.
And so it was so clever. But yeah, the amount of people that played on that, JJ Exarlic, Andy Richards, Steve Howe, the band barely touched it. By their own admission, the band barely touched it. So.
I had to listen to it around a mate's house because it was banned in our house. Because Mike Smith said it was rude. So that's good enough for my mum.
I remember going.
It was rude.
I was in high school and I walked. The town centre was 2 miles from the high school, and I walked to Woolworths to buy that, and I got back with about 10 minutes to spare before the end of lunch, and we put on the first side. Which was Welcome to the Pleasure Dome, which starts off with a couple of shorter tracks. It's a good 15 minutes long, and we were all late to class, and we all got told off. But we were just, it wasn't one of those mind-blowing experiences. It was just amazing, But again, all those songs, melody, arrangements, it was just fantastic.
Charismatic front people as well. I mean, you had Holly Johnson, of course, was extraordinary, but I mean, winding weirdly back to Aitken and Waterman, they had some great singers, but they also had some very inexperienced artists as well. People who just turned up and said, it was almost like the start of the X Factor, wasn't it? People who had been singing in the shower, like Sonia, who pestered them until they got to go. And there was something lacking in that, in how to become a front person. It's like, I don't know that Kylie was any good at performing at that stage, and then something that she became much better at later. When you see them tromping around at the Radio 1 Roadshow, just lumping from one side of the stage to the other, there's playing to playback, of course, and it was. There's something lost in that. There's something awesome in a band that you have around you who are all experiencing this thing together as opposed to being just one person. But then, you know, Frank Sinatra, I mean, one person. Having an orchestra behind you, is that almost the same as playback? Yeah, probably to some degree. So we're just talking nonsense. I'm talking nonsense.
No, it was a very liberating time, you know, for musicians, whether you were a pro or whether you were like us, you know, amateurs trying to be pros.
Speak for yourself.
Well, you know, we had, it was, I think if I'd have been born maybe 10 years later, it would have been even more exciting, because by the time I got to a position where I could afford to buy this stuff, it can't, time had started, you know, oh God, I've got responsibilities now and all this kind of stuff. Whereas had I been born in, you know, if I'd been born the same time as Paulee, maybe, I could have maybe taken advantage of it sooner at a younger age, and then, but who knows? But it was, I just remember being so excited every month, whether it was 1-2 testing or electronic music, EMM or whatever it was, and then of course Sand on Sand. You just pour through the pages and go, right, that's what I'm going to get one of those. I'm going to get one of those, and I draw my setup, my rig. This is what I'm going to have. You know, I'm going to have a DX7 over here, and a Fairlight, and an SH101, and a
I'm sure I was going to have some cheetah synth. Wasn't that early innovation?
Yeah, cheetahs. Yeah.
They were cheap. They looked achievable. You know,
MS16 or something.
Yeah. Well, that's what we had to do. I mean, my first proper synthesizer, I guess, was the Commodore 64, and then the Commodore 64 FM expansion. That's got a lot to answer for.
Yeah.
But
can we give a shout out to Musines, by the way?
Oh, absolutely.
Where all of these old issues of electronic music maker and sound on sound and stuff like that are all there. Just go to musines.co.uk, right? And you just read articles after articles, just lose hours.
And the images and the adverts.
Images.
Oh, yeah.
Brilliant. Loads and loads of issues. And you can search by, various bits of gear or stuff like that. So
do you remember the Sound on Sound classifieds? Used to pour through that. There was the free
303 90 quid.
Yeah, and then there was a page of like the free classifieds that you could ring up and or send it in on a postcard.
Can I if I could go back in time, I would just hand my 7-year-old self just this list of stuff to acquire and basically say, listen, right? For your Christmas present this year, don't get the Lego pirate ship, right? Wait a few years. I'll buy you all the Lego pirate ships you want. Buy an MS-20 or a Mini Moog for 100 quid and just put it to one side. Just get one a year.
Yeah.
And then, I'd have thousands of pounds worth of synths by now, but there we go. Hindsight.
Yeah, well, we end up making up for it, as you know.
At least I'm not like Skynet levels of disruptive with my going back in time quick.
No, you just tell
I'm
yourself.
Just getting a few more synths, mind you. I don't have much space for any more synths. That's another issue.
Yeah.
But yeah. So, have we got a consensus yet on whether the 80s killed pop music?
Well, okay.
Was that not the point?
What's the point? Yeah. So, my original thinking about after the documentary was thinking about that. I mean, I made this comment on Facebook, which had a little bit of discussion about, which was that it was this sort of music. It was Aitken and Waterman that pushed me absolutely in any other direction. I mean, from that time, I'd been a pop person, pop, and I've been massively into pop, massively into soul, lots of different sorts of music, but always focused in what was happening at the time. I felt like I was very trendy, very into it. I was 18 in 88 and then 19 in 89. It's funny how it happens every year. But it was at that point that everything had narrowed. I felt in the discos, we had discos that we were going to. The music had just narrowed and narrowed down, and now house music is starting to come in, and it was like, what the heck is that? I mean, there was some interesting stuff with Pump Up the Volume and, those earlier tracks, which were at least musical, But then you had House Nation, and you had Jack Beat stuff from Chicago, and all that kind of stuff was just coming, and you're just going, this isn't fun. I'm not having a good time. You know, I've got me Malibu and Coke. I want to dance.
Southern Comfort lemonade.
Yeah, I want to have a good time, and I want to sing along. And you know, you've even dropped the alternative half hour. What happened to the Cure? You know, and all of this just meant that I felt very disillusioned, and going to discos was a very big and important part of my life. You know, part of my sexual awakening, part of my social circle, and drinking.
You said you wouldn't get Larry.
Yeah, sorry. and you know, drinking before you're allowed, all that kind of thing. And it was fantastic. And yet this seemed to be being pulled away by this lack of emotion, lack of stuff. And then I discovered Wonder Stuff, and my life changed like forever. But at 18, so 88, I picked up a guitar for the first time and started playing guitar. And I know, thinking back then, that was the time I was starting to change. I was starting to look elsewhere, because it just wasn't doing it for me anymore. I needed to broaden out. And I'm very, very, very grateful, actually, that I did, because it pushed me into listening to more difficult music, more interesting music for me, from my point of view.
Yeah.
I spent most of the early 90s, when all my friends were up 24 hours on E's, I was in folk clubs, finding old English standards. And, I actually, I joined that. Well, I didn't join, but I danced some Morris with the Morris dancers up in Islington. Hi, Islington Folk Club, if you're still there. And, had a fantastic time in a very acoustic, earthy space. And I don't think I ever would have done that if I hadn't been so pissed off. Stocking and Waterman for what they did.
Yeah.
But that's not to say I didn't love Round Round Baby Round Round, or Never Gonna Give You Up, because I did love those tracks also. And funny enough, I quite like Steps later on, but one dabbles.
You just said that out loud, by the way.
I did. I did. Because it's music, and music is to be enjoyed. It doesn't have to be you don't have to decide that something doesn't work for you anymore. No. So anyway, so that was some of my complaint, I guess. But also, it's part of that evolution, and different sorts of music push you into other places. I hope
definitely.
And I see that a lot with my kids and their Spotify.
Like Hot Goth Girls push me into industrial.
Always.
Yeah. Well, I look at my daughter now. She's gonna be 19 this year, and she's got a massive CD collection. That's her retro. So she has all these CDs, but these are CDs of 90s bands and early noughties bands, and there's a few. She does like Gary Newman. She did come in here a few years ago when I was playing Led Zeppelin. She goes, "What's this?" I was like, "Oh, this finally." But she was when she was a kid, she was into K-pop, all of that stuff. She was mad about it. But she had the ones that she liked and the ones that she didn't like. She was very specific about that. And then something changed. I don't know what, but she then started going all sort of emo and that kind of 90s emo stuff, and shoegazing and all this. And she's really getting into a lot of some very cool stuff. I have absolutely no worries about where her musical tastes are.
That's great.
And she doesn't go in for all this TikToky Spotify type stuff. She likes good albums. She buys lots of albums. And so I did all right, I think, with that one.
You did pretty good.
Well, you have to judge it on your kids. I've got one kid at the moment who's into the White Stripes, which is brilliant. And always the Pixies keeps coming out for no reason.
Oh, yeah. My daughter loves the Pixies. And she was really surprised when I said, have a look at my Pixies collection. She's like, oh, you've got those? Yeah.
That's surprisingly old. And I got another one who's just coming out of Radiohead, I think. I think he's discovered that there is something outside Radiohead. Not sure what it is yet, but there's definitely something there. But I'm very proud. I'm very proud. Yeah. But as a parent, you have that difficult situation where Smells Like Teen Spirit comes on and they jump on the sofas and you go, get off the sofa. What do you think you're doing? What do you think this is all about? We're just supposed to sit here and listen to the music. You don't react to it viscerally. Good Lord.
Yes. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Now, I tried to take my kids to gigs. So I've taken them to. I've done the whole 80s dad thing. So Tears for Fears, Depeche Mode, and a bunch of others. But I've also taken them to see The Darkness and Wet Leg. I mean, they were so excited actually the other night because Wet Leg have got a couple of Grammys and a couple of Brits this year. Oh, we saw those at the UEA. Yeah, we did because I've still got to try and convince them to come see Sleaford Mods or something like that. But
yes,
a couple of old farts throwing things at the audience.
That's it.
One imagines.
I mean, they love The Darkness, who are one of the greatest live bands going today, and local, and just a stunning a band to watch live, and musically brilliant, proper good old fashioned rock and roll. But I don't know. Yes.
So is there anything that they did in particular in those late 80s that we still do now that we really follow on to? Is there anything in that sort of production style that we think we still emulate? I generally don't know. I mean,
I think there's still an obsession with beats and breaks.
Do you think that's where that came from?
Yeah, because sort of hip hop by the mid to late 80s, hip hop had really matured into something that was not just novel, as it kind of I remember the first inklings of hip hop that we got over here in the UK, sort of through Malcolm McLaren and Africa Bambaataa and stuff, and it had it was novel, it wasn't novelty, but it was novel. It was a little different, but by sort of 85, 86, we'd started to see, certainly over here, and speaking, with a very British perspective, bands like Public Enemy who were, taking great samples and making great beats, and it became a very, that was what you did. If you were into hip hop and R&B, it was sitting down, making beats, getting a great groove with a bass line. And I still today, a lot of music you see today really focuses on getting a great groove, a great beat. What they're missing, I think, is the melody,
some music.
Yeah, I was. It's melody. I think that's what a lot is missing today. But
I mean, I'll do it for free. I'll go down. I'll walk in and go right. Just even these two chords over it, mate. Just stop. Pull your fucking finger out. Just these two chords. It'll be fine. Yeah. Job done.
It's strange actually how that evolved, because I was really into electro in my early teens. For some reason, there was a big Swaffham thing about breakdancing, and although I was a robotics person, I wasn't spinning on my head. Yeah. So I had Tour de France Kraftwerk. Tour de France was my first record because it was in the breakdance movie, not because I knew anything about electronic
Please make
music.
a video. I need evidence.
We used to get our stereo packets and stick them all together to make our little dance. That's
exactly it. Yeah. But I was just going to mention that Grandmaster Flash, Melly Mel, that kind of thing was very very musical. And my brother saw them play live at the UEA again. Funnily enough, I wasn't old enough, and said they were extraordinary. Yeah, we don't play for free. They'd sing as well from time to time. So I don't know what happened. I don't know why it went so minimalist. After that, well, I guess it just became about the voice, and that was the message.
I think it's like with a lot of art forms or a lot of technology, there's a lot of stripping away as things progress. We're going to strip it, take the physical medium of delivering music to the consumer. You had the LP record that started in like the 40s and the 50s, and that carried right through to the 1980s, and then CD. Or cassettes, we can now trim our costs, and we can have a smaller inlay and smaller cases. And then after CDs, we then got MP3s. Well, let's get rid of all the packaging altogether. It's just digital file, and we strip it back and we strip it back, and we think we're improving it. Yeah. But actually, what we're doing is we're taking all of the stuff that made that really good, which is why I think we've seen a big resurgence in vinyl. And I love it when I go into my local record shop and see people of my kids' age in there looking through. They want to buy records because they want that multi-sensory experience. And I think in a way, the music that's on these discs or tracks or digital files nowadays has been stripped back. Well, we don't need elaborate chords, or we don't need lots of layered vocals. We can just take one voice and stick it through an effect, and it will sound great. And we just strip it back and strip it back and strip it back. And I'm hoping there'll be a backlash at some point where everyone goes, oh, that's all really boring. And then somebody comes along and says, hey, chords. And
I hope it's me.
Well, yeah, whoever
in an outrageous outfit.
Whoever it is, I'll buy it. But,
can I mention one interesting thread that I haven't mentioned? So there's actually I live in a very weird world between very theory heavy classical people and people who completely denounce theory. There are people that completely, with that punk ethic, denounce theory, and they feel proud. They feel proud that they don't know any music theory, which they might actually. I haven't told them, but the way they talk about music sometimes sounds a lot like music theory to me. But anyway, we don't get into that because they'll get away from their proud. And then I understand them completely though, because I did a composition degree where I was around a load of classical people, and some of them were quite nice, but some of them were not, and saw absolutely zero worth in what I was writing, which was kind of elaborate, sometimes elaborate Queen-like pop, which can get very, it can get very harmonically complex. They saw no worth in it whatsoever. So I understand if these people came up against these people, these classical versus these anti-theory people, and maybe they're just rubbing one another up the wrong way. And I kind of feel caught in between two worlds because I've got a pretty complete, I mean, you're always learning, pretty complete knowledge of extensive harmony, including jazz harmony, inversions, leading notes, counterpoint, whatever. I know all of that, all in here. It'd be good. It'd be fun if I could show you and just. But anyway, maybe I'll do a series on harmony, and you can just hear me, blab on for ages. With exercises, with cool exercises, so I could demonstrate things because this is the thing I want to see if we can make music theory less of a negative thing, because music theory is magic. That's my opinion. It's not a dull exercise. It's magic. It's how you pick certain notes that make someone feel something.
Yeah.
Anytime you've listened to a record and felt something, could be to do with a timbre, but oftentimes it's to do with the notes they use. And if you can learn how to use those notes, surely that must be a wonderful, magical thing. And I can tell you it is a wonderful, magical thing. Childhood, you know what the childhood chord for me is? It's a fourth chord like F off a 5 like G. It was in songs all the time. There's your childhood.
That's Never-Ending Story, isn't it?
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah.
It could be it could be anything really.
It could be anything,
Yeah.
But this kind of never knew love like this before.
Yeah.
Here's the chord. My joypad fell. It's in my life is the chord.
Yeah.
That optimistic, beautiful chord.
Optimism,
and you'd hear it.
It is.
You'd hear it and you'd go, that's childhood, that's nostalgia. And you can learn to do stuff like that by learning music theory, and it might not be relevant to your practice, but peppering a bit of it in might help any musician, really.
Yeah.
And it might help. It might just speed the process up. If you're the kind of person who doesn't know any chords or anything, it might take quite a long time to get something going because you're just stabbing around in the dark for an idea. So it's not a scary thing. It's not going to make your music worse. You can still choose not to use it and just go with spontaneous kind of ear sound stuff. Like Debussy did that.
Yep.
He was like, I'm not going to obey these diatonic scales. I'm just going to, like, you know, go
Sounds
with what
good.
sounds good.
Yeah.
So I really want to hopefully see music theory made accessible. And I think there are a couple of things online and iPad apps and stuff like that, which are doing that now, like melodics and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But I just really think that I'd like to see more harmony in music, and I'd like people to feel less scared, and I'd feel like the to be less gatekeeping and pretentiousness around music.
I think music. If you say to someone, "I want to," you should learn music theory, or "I want to teach you music theory," I know I would get a little bit. Oh God, I'm going to have to read books, and I'm going to have to study. No, but it has that about it. You know, when you say to someone about music theory, they think it's academic and
it's like a driving test or something.
Yeah,
like driving
exactly. And they shy away from it. And I was like that. I'm not a trained musician in any shape or form, but I study the music I like.
Yes.
And I had this conversation. Here we go. Name drop. David Gamson from Scritti Politti.
Nice.
So I had a really long conversation with him about how he put together the music for albums like Cupid and Psyche 85 and Provision, and talked about what inspired him. And he studied Bach, and he loved all the things that Bach did, and the way that he would pick apart, instead of just going chord, he'd maybe have one chord here, but then he'd play parts of it with different instruments and revoice it and split that chord into an arpeggio, but a fast arpeggio, so it kind of sounds like a chord, but it's not all being played at once. And just those clever syncopations and splitting up of things to add depth and layers and interest. And I aspire, I listen to his stuff to try and put something together that's sort of remotely interesting, rather than just going bush.
Well, I mean, that makes a lot of sense, because every time I hear a Scritti Politti song, I've got the 12-inch of Perfect Way. I know back in the house somewhere. It's so complex. It's like every note there's a different thing happening. It's a tumbling of stuff and complexity, and it's just it's quite stunning. I mean, his ability to program, I imagine, was probably ahead of his time.
Well, and to think, I recently got a Yamaha QX1, which I've been looking for ages. Famously as difficult to program as a DX7 is, and to think that they did so much of that sequencing on Provision, which was the third album, on a QX1. I mean, that is some real commitment. But one of the surprising things that I found out was Cupid and Psyche 85 for me is, again, it's probably the most perfect album that I personally think that exists, and never get tired of it. And I used to listen to it over, and I wore a cassette of it. I had to buy another one, and I just listened to it over and over, just trying to figure out, like you say, what's going on there. And then you listen to it again. I didn't hear that. Where the hell did that come from? And you're trying to piece it all together and pick it apart and figure out what's going on. And I just thought, this is insane. They've obviously got the very latest technology. I'd read through the liner notes. There would be a Fairlight listed here or there. I'm sure that this must be the best sequenced album of all time. And then I spoke to Gamson, and he said there's hardly any sequencing in that album whatsoever. Everything that we put a click track down on a Lindrum, and then we just went over and over and over until we got that sound. But in 1984, when they were recording it, MIDI was a year old and not very good. And so that they wanted that machine-like quality, but they didn't have the nous or the equipment to do it properly. So it was like, let's get a beat up on the Lindrum or the 808, and then everybody plays to that, and we do it over and over and over and over until we get it right. And that's why it took like 3 years to make. Same with provision took 3 years to make. Crazy.
Wild.
Wow. There's been a lot of support for your Harmony series, Paulie, in the chat.
Yeah, do that.
Oh, great.
Lot
Magical
of
Harmony
wanting that.
Adventure.
That's
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
I mean, do you think that
But-
comes from? Is it more pertinent to people who play keyboard synthesizers? Is that you think where it's going to be most useful?
I mean, I write most of my music on my DAW. This is going to sound really random. I write most of it in the piano roll,
Right.
so I don't actually play most of
So you
the
just
stuff
paint it all in.
But you
paint
know
it
what
all in.
those notes are going to sound like.
Okay. That's interesting.
Sure. I
Would
mean,
that be
there's a little preview for every note you click. Yeah, and I know most of if I'm recording a linear song, it's all just up here, so I just click through and do it, but it's going to be useful for everyone because you'll be able to learn a series of tricks. For instance, just people don't think of, you can get quite interesting harmony in a song just by cycling fifths and octaves, right? And just play around with bass notes,
Inversions was one thing I learned later on in life, was that
Just random notes,
But if you play a chord and you think, well, that sounds okay, but then you invert it and you take the top note and make that the bottom note, all of a sudden you've got something else. And in fact, you could make a whole verse out of the same chord, but just play different inversions of it. And we talked about this on the Process Network a few weeks ago. There's a web page or website now you can go to, and you just pick your chords. It tells you all of the chords that would work with that in that key.
Sure.
But you can also mess around with the inversions. And I found myself just picking one chord. Oh, I like that chord. And then going through the inversions and actually coming up with like a 4-bar, 8-bar sequence that was just the same chord but different inversions, and it sounded a little different. And then you add a bass line, and the bass line's a thing that's changing. The bass line is the thing that takes that, the root note takes it into a different place, but everything is just this one chord, different inversions.
Well, Paulie, what you played there is the basis of all Eurorack.
Sure.
It's just an arpeggiation over the top of a moving bass note. That's it. That's what we like it. We know it.
That's all you need,
so well.
And when you get a bit more thing, you can maybe put, like in extensions, I've just scored a very low budget kind
There
of
you go, yeah.
mild children's VHS tape there.
Yeah, and it's superbly lo-fi through our stream at the moment, which is excellent. I mean, if only someone would take the time to put all these kind of progressions together and sell them to us in some kind of MIDI pack. I think that would be a win.
Got you.
Words.
Oh.
Well,
this
is, I mean, everyone goes on about MIDI packs these days, and they are the work of Satan. But Robin and I, you might know about these, Paulie. Do you remember Twiddly Bits?
Pardon?
Twiddly Bits.
Do you mean the Korg Twiddly Bits?
No. These were Twiddly Bits. This was early GeForce days, before GeForce was GeForce. Dave Spears used to put
MIDI
all of them
files.
Together. There were MIDI files on a 3.5-inch floppy disk that you loaded into your computer, and then a lot of them had sort of chord progressions or something, but most of it was just little arpeggios, little this, little that, or it was just the raw MIDI data, not the note data. So you could actually, like my first kind of proper, say pro-type synthesizer was a Roland Sound Canvas, and it had filters and everything on it, but it didn't have any direct access to those through the front panel. So you got the Twiddly Bits Programmer's Toolkit, and you had all the NRPNs and the CCs to open and close all the filters. And so you wrote your piece, and then you overlaid this MIDI file, and it was 303 bass sweeps if you wanted to. It was just. So we put.
I had an XG, of course. I had an SWXG, so I was next level With the XG edits, you could get into those filters, man.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh man.
Well, the GS, the
Jimi
Roland
Hendrix
GS was,
demo
yeah.
was awesome.
Heavy, man.
Yeah. But
Band in the
point
Box is still going. You know that Band in the Box is still going.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
God bless them. I mean, it still looks a bit 96, but it's still doing it.
I was lucky. I say lucky enough. In the early 90s, I had the Roland Sound Canvas, which was the GS, which was their version, of extended general.
Was
MIDI.
it the white one, the PC one?
No, it's the grey one. It was the VL that I had, which was designed for use with a computer. It was the cut. Well, I say it was cut down version. Internally, it was the same sound engine, which was all derived from the JVs, and then before that, the D50s. It was the same sound engine, but it just had less controls on the front, so you didn't have direct access to all the effects controls. But they were all there. You just had to do it over CCs and RPNs. But I had that, and I had a Yamaha CS1X, which had XG and all the XG stuff, and an RM1X as well, which was great. It was a little bit crappy, especially with like filter suites, because it was stepping all the way. It was all all digital, just horrible. But for a young sort of budding musician, it was affordable, and it did some good stuff. And the Yamaha addiction continued.
Yes. Yes, to dangerous levels.
Yes, to expensive dangerous levels. Yes.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah. And now exactly all I want to do is, I've got this TX816 now, which that's a real box tick from the past. I've always wanted one, so now I'm going to be really brave and hook that up to the QX1 and start trying to sequence.
Yes.
But I got very excited the other day because I've been searching for the original factory floppy disks for the QX1, these 5.25-inch floppies that had the demonstration files on. Couldn't find them anywhere. And I was speaking to a friend last night. She says, "Oh, I've got some of those in cupboard." Lovely.
Amazing.
Yeah. So they should be on display at some.
Don't copy that floppy.
Oh, yes. But yeah, I mean,
copy that floppy.
all I'm doing these days in the 2020s is trying to recapture what I couldn't do in the 1980s because I didn't have the money, or the wherewithal. But it's funny because I was thinking about it. Steve Howell, the late Steve Howell, who of course was behind Hollow Sun and all that stuff. I remember talking to him because we got connected because I bought an Akai sampler. Went online looking for free Akai samples because I couldn't afford the sample, and found Hollow Sun. Sent him a thank you note, and that's how we struck up our friendship for many years. And we used to have these arguments late into the night about the democratization of music making that started in the 80s and continues to this day. And he said, "Oh, it's the downfall. It's the downfall of music because it's removed a filter." And I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, now everyone can afford it. Before, you had to have a bit of money in your wallet, and it would filter out those that had and those that didn't have." And I was like, "No." And as I've got older, I'm thinking, maybe he had a point.
It was a filter,
It wasn't a good filter, but
was it the best filter? Because
no,
you could have a lot of money and no talent.
Absolutely, and but that still happens today, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah, I mean, we all talk about the millions of hours of stuff that gets loaded to Spotify every day or every hour. I don't think that's relevant. I don't think the amount of people making music, I don't think is ever going to harm the music that comes to the top because I don't know, it's not just, I mean, there's so many forces at work. There's so many ways that music will always be taken care of by the record companies who are doing their thing, and they feed us the music that they think we want to listen to. That's always going to take up a big chunk of stuff. It doesn't matter what the rest of us are farting out of ourselves. None of that's going to necessarily get anywhere further than your immediate sphere. But there's always the potential that it will, and there's always that possibility. There's always that getting attached to an art film, or getting attached to something else, or something else that somebody likes that then somehow gets boosted around the edges. And that's always been the case with from crappy punk, from skiffle, from folk music. All of that has always been muddling around the edges trying to get itself heard, or not even necessarily trying to be heard, but just existing because it's flipping awesome to do so, you know.
I mean, cream does rise, doesn't it? But...
It does. But we get, this is my chip on my shoulder for being a professional hobbyist bit, you know, where it's like, you know, everyone gets too tied up in the money making proper side of what proper music is supposed to be about, when I've always just thoroughly enjoyed the fact that every little bit of democratization that comes along, whether it's a cheaper synth or a cheaper guitar or a piece of software, you know, that first time I copied and pasted a guitar riff in Digital Orchestrator Plus on my PC was just amazing. It completely blew my mind, and has enabled me to do so many things. I just can't quite believe it. And if it had been down to me having to book studio time, it just never would have happened.
No,
I'd be waiting around on a street corner for some record A&R man to pop by accident and to sign me up, which just doesn't seem that likely.
I sent a demo tape off to a label called Do It Records. This was about 1981, 82. And I'd recorded it on my new Ferguson stereo radio cassette recording. It was just me singing to a bunch of stuff, and sent it off to Do It Records, because Do It Records was the label that Adamant signed to for his first album. So I thought, oh yeah, that's the one I need to be signed to. And of course, I never heard anything back. Discovered later on that label was owned and run by Robin Scott of pop music and other great things. And a few years ago, I had the opportunity to work with Robin, and I asked him where my demo cassette was, and he didn't have an answer for me. I was quite disappointed.
God, I was hoping for a real zinger of an ending to that story.
Oh no, I wish. I did. We did another one. Bill Wyman is local around here. He lives at a place called Getting Hall, just outside Stowmarket. And in 1980 something, probably about 80. When was he going out with Mandy Smith? There's a Stock Aitken and Waterman connection, because she did a Stock Aitken and Waterman track. Must have been about 87, 88 or something. And the bass player in our band was also a car valeter, and he got commissioned to do a bunch of Bill's cars because he had a whole garage full of them. And I was on my day off from the co-op or whatever it was I was working at the time, and he said, "Do you want to come and earn a few extra quid and help me valet some of these cars at Bill Wyman's gaff?" So we're like, "Yeah." And as we're thinking about this, we said we could take a tape, we could give it to Bill Wyman. So we get to the place. Bill's out on tour with the Stones in Russia or something like that, and so we gave it to the housekeeper. And to this day, we still haven't heard.
Oh,
so, yeah.
Yeah, you think you're going to make it though. I mean, I sent a cassette into International Musician and Recording World, their competition, to win 40 grand's worth of gear and a van. That was the prize, and a van to put it in. So I remember I put together a couple of songs, one of which you'll probably hear in a little bit. And I remember going to the photo booth because you had to send in a photo of yourself, of the band. So I went to the photo booth at Kings Lynn Station and sat in there. And it was a black and white one as well for that. And I had a guitar in one hand and a little Casio synth in the other, like this. and that was the photos I sent in. I wish I had them somehow, but you sent them all in and off they went. Never heard a thing. No. Somebody won the gear. I don't know who. It wasn't me.
Yeah.
Dear.
Yes, I used to love trying to go in for all of those competitions. Sound on sound. Win this package of things, and you think, oh, that's all I need. Just give me that. Just that one thing.
Wow.
But you'd spend months just thinking about the possibilities that would happen when you won, because you're going to win.
Yeah. Because you are. Yeah. Who else buys this stuff? Nobody.
Yeah. But then
especially
after years of working at Turnkey, when everyone comes to your account and say, "Yeah, I just got this record deal, right? We want to buy a load of stuff," and it would happen every week.
Really?
And they wouldn't be back.
Oh,
and you'd never see them on the telly. But heck, we
I'd
were
go
selling
into Turnkey
dreams.
And just demo everything. Yeah.
Selling dreams.
I used to hang out in Turnkey, just playing around and annoying the sales assistants. I think I probably, because didn't you work downstairs in the sample bit?
Not if I could help it. I'd go down there sometimes to get oh God, what was it? Get Steve to teach me how to DJ.
Okay.
So when I was bored, I'd go down there to play on that. But no, I wasn't
remember
I wasn't down there on purpose.
I remember going in because it was kind of dark and dingy, wasn't it? And there was a counter, and you had all the sample CDs,
Yeah.
and I think they had one of those first kind of sample library jukeboxes as well, wasn't there?
God.
One of those in there.
We sweated blood over those things.
I know.
Get that to work. Gee whiz.
Yeah.
That was that's
was
where the Carillon came from. Was all our work on that system. Carillon audio system sort of came out of that stuff.
Yeah, because I remember seeing that was another. There's another thing, blast from the past. So this is probably more the 90s than it was the 80s. But Sound on Sound always came with a turnkey catalog stuffed in the middle.
Yeah,
and there would always be like the first few pages were the bargains, and that's where I got my first. I got my sound canvas from there, and I remember passing up on a Technics. You mentioned this afternoon. Technics WSA 1.
Yes,
that they were knocking out at stupid money, and I looked at it and thought, "Wow, that's crazy." And then I thought, Technics, they're home organs, aren't they?
Yeah,
don't want one of those. That's not cool. You know, if I stand on stage with a Technics, they're all thinking, "Oh no, he's using his dad's home organ." Turns out it's a
classic.
Good synth, yeah,
we had a container load. We got the last container in existence and duffed them all out for 50 quid or something. Boxes and boxes of those things.
There was a dance card with terrible dance samples on it, and one voice that goes crazy, which if you drop it 4 octaves and
somebody sample that.
Oh well, okay. If you drop it 4 octaves and use it as a carpless exciter, it gets very sinister very quickly.
We also had the repair department was full of them as well. They were not very reliable, so it seemed. But I remember the adverts in the press were like you'd have a guitar morphing into a trumpet or something. Wasn't that the vibe they were going for?
That was the vibe.
That was the buzz though back in the 90s. It was like, that's what that's why I got the Prophecy, because it was the thought of being able to combine an exciter like a string with a resonator like a clarinet, tube. And I never really got my head around all of that, and just kind of mostly stuck with the presets. But but what presets? I mean, fantastic.
I have to head off now and feed my babby.
Well, I think we've probably chatted on long enough.
Yeah.
I don't think we've answered the question necessarily, but we have talked around it a lot, which is entertaining in of itself.
We should do it again.
Yeah, I would say that it didn't kill the 80s. Didn't kill pop music, but I think it might have instigated the beginning of the end, especially towards the end of the decade. I think that things started to roll off downhill. There's been some bumps along the way, but I don't think.
Or perhaps it changed the dominance, so that maybe the pop music which dominated in the 80s perhaps has now, the top 40 is now this big, and we just have this breadth of music around it now. And perhaps that's what they gave us. It showed us that pop music is finite, perhaps to a degree, and ends up repeating itself, and that inspires this broadening and going out looking for other things type vibe. That feels like a happy ending.
Yeah.
All right then. Well, we'll let you go. I'll play my track, right? Just for a second as we talk out. Let me just pull that down because it doesn't start well. But just to the start's actually good because it tells you something. Because I'll tell you now that this is recorded on a twin tape deck. The twin tape deck had automatic recording levels, and so you'd get something and then it'd go whoa, and then it'd try to reset itself and try to cope.
Incredible.
And this was done tape over tape, layer over layer, no sequencing.
Sound on sound.
But I'll talk about the bits as they come along or something. But just for a minute. Oh, it's not happening now.
It was all fine in rehearsal.
Oh, it was good in rehearsal. What have I done? See, that looks like it's playing. It is playing. So why are you not getting any sound? Because that's not it. There we go. Let's try this label here. Here we go.
There you go.
Coming in.
That's wobbly.
It's cassette, man.
Wow, flutter.
Now the drums are from a Technics KN200SX. Wow. So are the pads.
Incredible.
That feel. And the bass line is from a DX100. that I had to play the same over and over again, which I realised after halfway through the song. I've forgotten what it is. I don't even know what it is anymore.
Amazing.
So this is 1985. I think I decided. And the layers are all DX100.
Brass.
Wait for it. So this is obviously sampled off the end of Living in America by James Brown. Which I was playing on my Commodore 64 because I had the sampler for the Commodore 64. He had 1.6 seconds of sampling. And it just does the same thing now for about 4 minutes.
I love the scratching. That was...
There's no velocity in this baby.
Yeah, dynamics. What are they?
See, I've lost my bass
What are
line now.
they?
I don't know what I'm playing.
What are
Yeah, round and round it goes.
they? Fantastic.
So there we go. There's a little bit of genuine 1980s
Brilliant stuff.
independent stuff. So cool. Yeah. So that's great. Thank you ever so much. Thank you to all the people in the chat who have contributed to this this stream of thing.
Yeah.
It's been fun. Yeah, we should do it again. We're usually talking. It's good to reminisce and talk about technology in a
Good to bitch and moan.
Yeah, exactly. So thanks ever so much, Paulie, for being with us. That's fantastic. And to you, Robbie, good to see you both.
You.
Yeah.
And to talk on my show. It's good. It's good to have you here rather than being on somebody else's, which is great. So, let me hang on. I've got an outro. Wait a second. I'll get that lined up. Seamless. So yeah, cool. Thanks everyone. I will zip this in, and we will see you soon. Do I have anything to tell you? Just while I'm thinking about it.
Syntheast.
Yeah, Syntheast is coming up. Obviously, it's about 2-3 weeks away now, but it is sold out. So there you go. It's going to be great for us who are going to be there. It's going to be fantastic. So looking forward to that. I will squeeze in a Molten Monthly at the end of this month, and also a live stream just before it. And if you can't get to Syntheast, I am going to also play at the EMOM on the Thursday before. It will be like my dress rehearsal, I've decided, assuming I can get my rig worked out. What on earth it is, I can't even point. Stop looking at this. What? This thing here is my rig I'm setting up for the gig, so hopefully I would have made it make some sense by then. That would be good. So yeah, that's great. Thanks very much for coming along.
Thank you.
Take care and go and make some tunes in an 80s style-y.
Yes.